In an earlier video I mentioned how I was not impressed with news services, well, the ones I know here in Australia. There is virtually little news, and what they do put out, they tend to over-dramatise to such an extent. They pounce on the littlest thing and blow it up out of proportion just to get a bit of sensationalism out of the fact that they can't afford any real overseas news where people really are getting hurt in an ongoing way. Now, this can have ramifications of sort. One even came back on me once, in a very strange way. In my very dull and mundane life, I've actually been caught up in two coups. Well, one wasn't really a coup, it was an occupation force, and that was in Noumea in the mid to late 80s, I forget the actual date. And the other one was the coup in Suva when Colonel Rembuka took over the government. In both cases, evidently here in Australia, it was played up as if there was bodies lining the streets and all the rest of it. Rubbish. None of that happened. I'll concentrate on the one in Noumea because many Australians know Noumea for what it is. It's nice, clean, tidy. But they had a problem, and I'm going back into the 70s. They were the most awful people in the world. They weren't French, or according to them they weren't French, they were New Caledonians. And they hated anything coming out of Paris, but also they maintained the French dislike, let's tone it down a bit, of anything British or Australian or anything to do with the British Commonwealth. I've had shopkeepers refuse to serve me when I'm standing there bleeding and all I want to do is get a band-aid. Suddenly nobody spoke English. This was because they had nickel. Quite a valuable commodity at one time, although it turned half the island red. But then as nickel dropped off and they couldn't even stockpile anymore, their attitude started to change. Suddenly shopkeepers spoke English. I even got a smile or two. Well, maybe it was only one, but you know what I mean. They were dreadful. They were more arrogant than the French, and that's saying something. We got into Noumea. We'd come from the Isle of Pines the day before. We got into Noumea about 7 a.m. or alongside, and all lined up at 7 a.m. And I thought I'd wander up the road after seeing to ship's business and chew the breeze with Rene, our port agent. Lovely man, one of the best. Heart of gold, didn't come from Noumea, he was French, but we never really did find out where Rene came from. Anyway, I walked up to the square and went into his restaurant there. He wasn't only the port agent, he owned restaurants and bars, you name it, he was into it. He also imported 6 Citroens and 6 gorgeous girls to drive them from France. He was very far thinking in seeing what Noumea could be in tourism. Now, the day before we got there, we heard that a French ship had arrived with an occupying force. This was all about their referendum for independence. Rene was sort of neutral. He's the sort of guy that shrugs his shoulders and says, let's have a glass of wine. His manager, or one of his managers, Jean-Jacques Bourdinot, was on the Kanak side, wanting total freedom from from France. I knew Jean-Jacques, he wasn't a bad guy, just a bit intolerant of many things. So I got up to the restaurant and Rene was sitting there and I couldn't see much sign of this coup. There were a few French troops walking around. They were more interested in the girls in bikinis than they were in anything else. And I got many a hearty bonjour. Never happened in the past. The New Caledonians wouldn't say bonjour, they'd say something that sounds very similar, but not bonjour. So I met Rene and he told me what the situation was. The government house had been taken over. There was what would you call it? Not even an interim government, just somebody watching over the present government to make sure they stayed in line. I think they only brought about 350 troops with them. And these had evidently come from somewhere in the Far East where they'd been training. So for them to suddenly lob up in Umea, beautiful day, sunshine, golden beaches, girls in bikinis, lots of them, a lot of French, also a lot of Australians, and a few New Zealanders. You could tell them they wore slightly larger bikinis than the French and the Australians. And by mid-morning, most of them were on the beach drinking wine, having a chat. All's well with the world. It was okay. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't really an occupation. And although the press in Australia had been talking about it as a bloody coup, it was nowhere near a bloody coup. Anyway, I've been told I've got to speed up. It got too long last time. We went back to the restaurant to find total chaos in Rene's street cafe, restaurant, bar, whatever it was, in the confusion of the occupation. The staff member had rotated the wine wrong from last night. You was put it out the night before. He put the red wine into the chillers and left the white wine out to get to room temperature. And of course, this was such a disaster. Rene didn't mind his Citroens going and his girls heading back to France, although a couple of them came to Australia. But his restaurant had chilled red wine and warm white wine. And for him, that was the end of the world. Anyway, cutting again, a long story short, we had a meal. We wandered down to Ansparta Beach to watch all the French troops on the beach with the nice bikini girls, and I think we went out to the Big Buoy at the end of Citron Bay just to stare out at the sea for a while. Then we went back to the ship and we were sailing, I seem to remember, at 2 a.m. So we had a lot more wine and a lot more food on board, and then Rene reluctantly went ashore. We singled up, engines to slow ahead, and we left via Bellari Passage, the longer one. Now you're wondering how I got hurt or traumatized through this occupation. I got home 2 days later, or 2.5 days later, walked into the house, said hi to the children, put my sea bag down. My wife came out of the kitchen wearing an apron, which she seldom did. She's very independent. That was not her place, her ultimate place, shall we say. Walked over and gave me the biggest slap to the back of the head I'd ever heard. I think my brain went about 3 inches forward in the skull. Probably never came back. That's probably why every day is a bit of a mystery to me now. And the upshot was, on the news in Australia, they'd been talking about a bloody coup. Soldiers in the streets, gendarmes bailed up here, there and everywhere. Troops marching down in Savada to take over all the tourist hotels. Wrong. Never happened. And to all the nice troops there and the policemen, because I won't be going back again, I'm sad to say, I just want to say bonjour and thank you for a very interesting day and half a night. And it was the most pleasant conflict I'd ever been in. Then, as now, I think these news people overdoing everything. I mean, my wife was frantic. She hadn't heard from me. She knew my ship was there, but you've got to laugh. I know I shouldn't, but that was it. That was the big coup. Fiji was a bit different. I'll come back to that another day. But again, no real shots fired. Nobody got hurt any more than any night they used to in the back streets of Suva. But until then, just take a pinch of salt with all this ramping up of news. Try and look past what they're telling you with their 1,000 people out on the street with microphones huddled in doorways or in the rain or whatever, and just look at the basis of it. And if you've got any doubt, give me a call. I've still got friends all over the South Pacific. They'll give us the real news. Anyway, yeah, I've got to go. Things to do before they put me down for the night. And so I'll just again say, be nice. Cheers.